For the 10 people who still play the game, you're probably aware of Bungie's recent announcement that Season 4 is going to put Trials on the back burner. And I said back burner, YouTube, not the back door where you enjoy fucking yourself every day. But last week, Bungie made the decision that Trials of the Nine will not be active at all during the first few months of Forsaken, which if you were to estimate this shit, that's probably going to be around, I guess, December is the next time it'll be available. So the reason that they give is that Trials needs a rework. And in all honesty, rightfully so. It's not the first time Trials has been inactive, but usually inactivity was the result of something being fucked up, like unlimited supers, glitchers getting through the walls or some shit like that. Basically, something people could use to cheat would be a reason that Trials would actually shut down. There were also some periods of time when Bungie would end Trials in preparation for, say, a DLC, or after a DLC just released to give people time to ramp up for the game mode. But at no point has the game mode ever been taken offline for 3 months just because it's fucked up. This is a first for Destiny, and the fact is, the writing has been on the wall for Trials for a very long time. So let's see how all of this occurred, what led to the life, death, and eventual rebirth of what has to be Destiny's most popular and polarizing endgame Crucible mode. So let's start from the beginning. When Destiny 1 launched, right, it came out with all these mixed reviews. The Dark Below was then released, and that shit came out with awful reviews. So the next scheduled DLC was going to be House of Wolves in year 1. Right off the bat, House of Wolves was not coming with a raid. Prison of Elders was going to be the endgame activity, but along with the absence of a raid and the addition of Prison of Elders, Destiny was launching Trials of Osiris, their most competitive Crucible mode, an elimination style mode with wins progressing you towards the ultimate reward, and losses potentially preventing you from getting that reward. The reward that you were going to get was a visit to the lighthouse, and where awesome rewards were granted, including adept versions of some of the good primary guns that we got. Adepts added elemental burns to each weapon, which were found on raid weapons up until that point. You couldn't find them on any normal gun. You had to find them on the raid weapons or now the adept weapons. Since House of Wolves was relatively light on PvE content, you could say, Trials was the mode that really kept people playing. It got people to play the Crucible. It gave streamers a way of exploiting their stupid ass followers. Hey, I'll carry you to the lighthouse if you give me more money. You know, put money in the pockets of account recovery players. It gave assholes a chance to DDoS and Cheetos in all the games and shit like that. In all honesty, it was a big part of keeping Destiny relevant until the Taken King launched. Unfortunately, there are no websites that have the numbers to back up all these claims that I'm making right now. But when Trials of Osiris was active, there were multiple websites that gave weekly stats on personal info, leaderboard info, and overall the population playing the game. All those websites are now gone. They're all focused on Destiny 2. I guess all the API stats have been removed for those games. But it's safe to say that the totals for Trials kept a good amount of the population playing Destiny throughout the game's lifespan. Now, the initial attempts at Trials were not perfect. The game mode has never been perfect, but it was a good opening attempt at a competitive game mode to fuel the best players to chase down excellent guns and high-level armor. Over time, Bungie made some changes to Trials during the Taken King DLC. Bungie made some changes to Trials during the Taken King DLC and all the way through Rise of Iron. Things like matchmaking changes, you know, where you're facing teams with the same win total as you as your own card. So instead of facing a team with 0 wins when you had 5, now if you had a 6-win total, you had to face a team with a 6-win total. It raised the stakes, essentially. Skill-based matchmaking was added, you know, in order to really balance out the playing field, to keep people playing with others within their same skill level or so. The idea was to keep the community competitive with each other, instead of matching up 3 pro couch potato players against 3 weekend warriors just trying to get a few bounties done. The loot you got from the event was also worth getting, especially guns like the Messenger or the Doctrine of Passing. Holy shit, those were amazing guns in the Crucible at that time. But on the flip side, while Trial kept players coming back through long droughts of PvE content, one of the biggest complaints that still occurs to this date is that Bungie would make changes based on Trials information. Bungie would make class and ability changes based on Trials feedback. The gun changes were being made would also affect PvE because Bungie truly never figured out how to separate church and state from the game. If you made a change in PvE, it affected PvP. If you made a change for PvP, it affected PvE. For example, The Truth was an amazing PvP rocket, but it was only relatively average in PvE. They reduced its greatness in the Crucible, but they made it utterly fucking pointless to use against the enemy AI. When Trials first launched, hand cannons were the dominant weapon, particularly the 3 exotics, Thorn, Last Word, and Hawkmoon, pretty much in that order. Bungie rolled out a gun update, and all of a sudden, pulse rifles rose to greatness with Nerwin's Mercy, the Red Death. Then pulse rifles were nerfed, and then the Mitre tool became dominant. Then they changed it again. All of a sudden, it was Clever Dragon and Grasp of Malik. Changed it again, and it was back to IS Luna and the Palindrome. Meanwhile, all these PvP-related changes, all these Trials-related changes, we're throwing all the PvE changes for a fucking loop. Aside from Hung Jury and most scout rifles, the changes to the weapons constantly fucked up your AI loadouts. The classes themselves were always an issue. Remember the Sunsinger? Between reviving from death and the fucking Firebolt Viking grenade combo, oh motherfucker, they had to end up nerfing that simply because of Trials. Or the Titan Juggernaut shield. Wombo combo. There was all kinds of shit that threw the balance out of whack in the Crucible. But it really wasn't an issue for those who were just running strikes or playing patrols or whatever the fuck it was. Bungie adjusted things for Trials in the Crucible, but it always led to annoyances from the PvE crowd. By the end of Destiny 1, with all the changes to Trials, to the Crucible, to the guns, to the abilities, the mode was really geared towards people who were basically playing it for EP measuring reasons. The loot wasn't as insanely good as it used to be. The matches themselves were fucking cancer, and the population was small, since the game was obviously winding down to head towards Destiny 2. When Destiny 2 rolled out, though, the differences between the two games in general were obviously noticed by fans. I mean, just look at across the board. How many things did people complain about that Destiny 2 was missing from Destiny 1? Trials of Osiris, of course, had its own list of changes that fucked things up. But from general Crucible changes that people didn't like, such as slower time to kill, 4 versus 4, and the gun system, to Trial-specific things like elimination being only one of the modes that was added. We also had the 9 running shit instead of Curse of Osiris, power advantages being removed, and the relatively poor loot pool. Destiny 2 launched to average reviews again. But unlike Destiny 1, where House of Wolves managed to create a unique game mode for the competitive Crucible, there hasn't been that magic in Destiny 2. Trials was already part of the launch product, and it was in a piss-poor state. And all you have to do is look at the progression of how low Trials numbers sank over the course of the years. While there are some spikes in play numbers, the overall numbers steadily declined from the start of the year all the way to the end. Now, declining numbers are obviously natural. There's no question about that. Every game is going to go through that. As games get older, people are going to leave to play other shit. So it's not like these numbers will be the same from the beginning of the year all the way to the end of the year. But even after 94 weeks, Trials of Osiris still had 250,000 players playing it in Destiny 1. Destiny 2 has more weeks under 100,000 players than it does over it. It hit an all-time low of 48,000 in February, which was pretty much rock bottom for the game at that time because that was right after Curse of Osiris. So when you figure that Destiny 1's lowest amount was never below 250,000 and Destiny 2 is 48,000, that's a huge difference. Now, this chart that I'm posting was created by Redditor. It's not my own. I'm not taking credit for it. I give credit for it in the link in the description, and it shows the progression of Trials, and you can see the giant fall off in the game. It wasn't until Warmind released that the numbers actually returned to over 100,000 players, and even then, that's still half the numbers at the end of Destiny 1's lifespan. So, how exactly did everything get this bad? Well, the explanation is that multiple factors have led to Trials' decline. Aside from the game changes from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2 that I already mentioned about, you know, the 4 vs 4, the time to kill, primary weapons, the biggest Crucible killer has been the rewards. You know, aside from a few guns in Destiny 2 Trials, there isn't a spectacular weapon or piece of armor that makes people grind to get that reward. There's no doctrine of passing, there's no messenger, and I think there was also that decent scout rifle that was introduced in the Rise of Iron at the end of Trials, whatever the hell. I think it was called the Burning Eye, something like that, whatever the fuck. It was a damn good PvE weapon right next to the Hung Jury. But there were items to chase in Destiny 1. In Destiny 2, is there an absolute must-have Trials weapon? I mean, the Prosecutor's not bad. The Purpose is pretty decent. But are they above and beyond the guns that are in their class? Probably not. I mean, for the Prosecutor, I could just use Uriel's Gift. For the Purpose, I could just use Nameless Midnight. So they're definitely nowhere near what the Messenger could do compared to other high-impact pulse rifles in Destiny 1. The lack of random rolls also affects your loot pools. Remember Destiny 1 when people wanted tier 12 gear and the rolls that you got from items could be tier 12 capable? Trials armor could get a tier 12 roll, so people played in search of getting that perfect set of gear. Even if you had a full set of gear, you could get something that was even better. You could get a replacement for a piece that was tier 12 capable. In Destiny 2, the lack of random rolls on armor, the removal of intellect, discipline, and strength means every piece of gear you get is going to be the same. If I get a chest piece in week number 1, it's the same chest piece I will get every single time I get it. The only difference in this game is the mod that I put on it. So if I get all 5 pieces of flawless gear in 5 straight weeks and I get my complete set, what incentive do I have to play week 6 when it comes to armor? Why would I play it if I get all the weapons and all the guns? Sure, Bungie tried to add ornaments to the loot pool, but really, did anyone give 2 fucks about ornaments other than the most hardcore collectors that had to have every fucking thing in the game? No. Once a player has all the rewards and the items they could possibly get, what would keep them coming back? It would have to be the fun factor or the enjoyment factor. And don't get me wrong, there are people who enjoy Trials. There are people who certainly play it simply because that is their favorite game mode. But for those who don't like Trials or don't like the Crucible, there really was no reason to dive back into the game. On top of that, you throw in things that people just didn't like. The time to kill obviously was much slower, and I keep referencing that. Back in Destiny 1, it was possible to solo around if you had your 2 teammates down and you knew how to siphon enemies into kill lanes. You had those hero moments. You could do that in Destiny 1. In Destiny 2, the time to kill is so damn slow that by the time you kill one enemy, you're most likely going to be at such low health to fight another that you're not going to be able to take on 1 more, let alone 3 more. Team shining was the main tactic to winning games as opposed to incredible individual skill. So right there alone, that shows one of the main differences that affected Trials in Destiny 2 compared to Destiny 1. 4 versus 4 has never made any sense. And while I don't think it's a major reason that people don't play it, it does cause some angst. I mean, if you're running Nightfall with 2 people and then you decide, you know what, let's get a 4 to run Trials, but now I want to run a raid. It's like, okay, now I need to get 6 people, and then maybe I want to run Trials after the raid, so we got to drop 2 people after that. It just doesn't work, man. Everything in Destiny is divisible by 3. 3 Guardian types, 3 subclasses, 3 elements in the game, 3 gun types from your primary, secondary power, 3 grenades, 3 jump abilities. 4 is never part of the equation. But Bungie decided to go with 4 versus 4 in hopes of making a splash in the esports world. It never did. It never will. And fans had to argue to get 6 versus 6 back to the game. Adding a new game mode was also a problem. Instead of just having survival, now you had to add another fucking game mode with an objective. Planting and defusing bombs, no less. And it just added to the frustration that was already in this game that made people want to just kill each other. There was no reason to add a new game mode like this. Elimination was fair enough. Kill the other team, they have to kill you. Now, you have planting and defusing. For whatever fucking reason, Bungie ignored common sense logic and they added this objective to survival. It did not need it. But aside from the loot being the main driving force and all the minor annoyances that people have, I think the final nail in the coffin has been competitive mode. Or more to the point, the ranking system in competitive mode. You know, prior to the ranking system being added only recently, and then on top of that, having rewards for reaching certain ranks, competitive mode was strictly like a practice ground for Trials teams, but ultimately a very empty game mode and experience before the ranking system. For casual players just trying to do their call to arms, nobody ever ventured into fucking competitive. You didn't really give a fuck. You didn't want to play against other teams who were testing their skills. If you just wanted to get your call to arms, you went into fucking quick play. However, the ranking system really added incentive to play. When Warmind released and Bungie finally pulled their head out of their ass for a few minutes, they added this ranking system to both casual and competitive. And the rewards for the competitive structure, which gave out actually pretty decent rewards, not amazing, but essentially you got a pretty damn decent reward that was more like a trophy more than anything. The Redrix Claymore has only been attained by a very small portion of people, and it has a pretty good perk set on it, although people say it's not as good as some of the other guns in the game, but essentially, it is that trophy. It's a unicorn trophy that only a small select group of players can get. While the ranking system of gains and losses can certainly be in its own video as to why that shit is all fucked up, matchmaking between skill and ranking, that could be its own fucking topic. I don't want to focus on these. I want to focus on what competitive in general has done to Trials. Competitive ranking and the rewards were something that gave players to chase down for. People wanted that Redrix Claymore. They grinded their ass off to get it. Some people wanted the Mida Tool Catalyst, and again, they grinded their ass off to get it. Getting to the highest ranking in a mode that penalized you massively for losing is a bit of bragging rights. So the competitive playlist became an area of prestige for the PvP players. It's a badge of honor to get the rewards and the ranking that very few players will actually achieve. That is something Trials seems to be lacking. Sure, get into the lighthouse or the spire, whatever the fuck it's called, with the giant goddamn fucking face. That's bragging rights. But all it took was 7 games to do it. Redrick's Claymore took a minimum of 80 straight competitive wins, and for most people, it will mean well over 100 games just to get it for the few who managed it, and for some, it probably took over 200 300 games to get it. Trials occurs every weekend, only from Friday to reset. Competitive is all week long. Trials doesn't have the ability to roll solo. Competitive does for the absolutely crazy-minded people who are willing to do it. As someone who plays neither mode, I can't stand the Crucible in general, I can't stand Trials, can't stand competitive at all, but I see the appeal of competitive over Trials. And most people would agree that Trials has become an obsolete part of Destiny with the changes that we've seen from launch until now. You know, you can't take credit away from Trials of Osiris breathing life into Destiny when it really needed it, and giving people a reason to play the mode when it first launched. But the general changes to Trials of Osiris, to Destiny 2's general Crucible problems, to competitive mode outperforming Trials, you can clearly see it's had a slow demise to this point. Personally, I don't see a reason why it should come back, considering Bungie just invest their time in the competitive ranking modes and keep that as a default tryhard playlist. But at some point, you know they're going to want to bring it back. You know they won't give up on it that easily because it was a popular mode back in the day. It was popular with streamers, it was popular with account recoveries, asshole hackers, you name it. So the mode will find another form in the future, but clearly it has to change. It has been surpassed by competitive in terms of the rewards, in terms of the sweatiness, and in terms of accessibility. But it just doesn't have the same appeal that it used to. And those pieces of competitive mode have really made Trials look obsolete. It just doesn't have the appeal that it used to. And the changes that have occurred since the very launch have led to this temporary removal that they're going to have. Now, in the future, we could talk about, oh, this change and that change, but here's the reality. I don't think anything is going to get Trials back to the year one when it first launched. I don't think anything is going to bring it back to its prominence when it first saw it in House of Wolves. However, they can at least improve the competitive portion. They can continue to improve that with rewards and better ranking systems and more things to chase for players. And then in the future, maybe roll out Trials of Osiris again as a short-term event that doesn't have the full rewards that you would normally see in the competitive mode. They will have some rewards, but obviously not as bearing as the ones that we have in competitive mode right now. And regardless if they ever bring it back, I ain't playing that shit. So that does it for this video. As always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit, and I'll see you guys in the next video.